The soup you asked for, beggar. Jenna laughed as the bucket tipped over my head. Cold slurry struck first, then the weight of it. Plates scraped clean into a gray tub, coffee grounds like sand, wilted lettuce slapping my cheek. The ballroom's air conditioning turned the mess to chill on my skin. For a beat, the string quartet kept playing as if nothing had happened, bows sawing dutifully through Pachelbel. Then one violin skated off pitch, and conversation broke into 100 bright fragments of shock. I had known the heat outside, Phoenix in late summer 2023, would press like a hand on the city. Inside, everything pretended to be cool. White linens, tall vases, soft lighting that made even the ice buckets gleam. 500 guests in their best clothes, a stage for smiles and speeches. I had told myself to keep my hands folded, my voice level, to let the evening pass without incident. But weddings turn into arenas faster than anyone admits. Under the flowers and the music, truth waits its cue. Mark's friends had started it, really. Shoulders at my back near the buffet, laughter with edges, the kind that tests whether you'll push back. One of them called me old school, a shrug of a compliment that felt like a pat on the head. Someone else wondered, too loudly, whether I'd be comfortable with the open bar. I stepped aside so the servers could pass. I've spent a life in garages where you learn to make room for moving parts. Thomas, Mark said, as if tasting a new word, smiling without warmth. He had a perfect tuxedo and a voice for microphones. So glad you could make it. The way his eyes slid past me to the photographer told the larger story. I was a prop, not a person. When I nodded, I felt the small pull in my lower back that never quite leaves. 63 teaches you which aches are harmless and which are warnings. Tonight's warning wasn't in my spine. Jenna swirled through the room like a comet. Bride's glow, bouquet of pale roses, laughter trained for cameras. My daughter, my only child. I had tied ribbons to her handlebars once in a yard of red dust in Mesquite, watched her wobble into sunlight. She used to look back to see if I was watching. Tonight, she looked past me. When our eyes met, it was brief, like a hand withdrawn before the shake finishes. Dad, she said when we ended up near the dessert table, don't hover, okay? The word landed softly but carried judgment. Just enjoy yourself. Demolished, I said, and heard how small it sounded. I wiped a smear of chocolate from my sleeve, more habit than vanity. Hands that remember wrenches never forget how to clean. The MC called for a toast, laughter, toasts, clinking. A groomsman lifted his glass and joked about upgrading families. People found it charming. I stood at the edge of a circle I used to be inside. When the waiter passed, someone behind me said, "Get him the soup," something simple. A giggle, the kind that pretends to be kind. I could have walked away. The doors to the hallway were 10 steps to my left. The heat outside would have been honest, at least. But a father stays where his child celebrates, even if the celebration has no room for him. A shove nudged me closer to the display of buffet platters, the silver lids hissing as servers lifted and lowered them. I steadied a wobbling tray so it wouldn't clatter. "Careful, Pop," one of the boys said, grinning, and the word pop wasn't affectionate. Wine splashed my shoe. I thought about saying, "That's enough." I thought about saying, "I'm still your elder." Instead, I breathed in slow, metal, detergent, steak, sugar, roses, and let my heartbeat find a rhythm. Then Jenna appeared again, sudden and radiant, a brightness that made every lens turn. A bridesmaid murmured something in her ear. Jenna's mouth twisted, amused. The gray tub sat on a bussing cart, half hidden behind the end of the buffet, waiting to be carried away. My daughter reached for the handles as if it were a bouquet. Mark watched with the alert look of a man who enjoys the moment before the punchline. "Jenna," I said, not loudly. Her name has never been a leash. She lifted the bucket anyway. It has a sound, that first tipping, liquid letting go, refuse sliding as one. The cold found my scalp, my collar, my eyelids. Grease smeared its indifferent fingers along my temple. Something stringy caught on my ear. Coffee grounds polka-dotted my shirt. A fragment of carrot lodged against my tie like a false boutonniere. A ring of guests took a step backward, as if shame could splash. In bursts. A woman gasped and then covered the gasp with a smile, as if politeness could erase what she'd witnessed. Someone lifted a phone and then lowered it. like a conscience battling curiosity. I felt the weight of 500 eyes, and the weight of one pair most of all. I kept my hands at my sides. A mechanic's hands learn not to flinch when hot coolant spits or a wrench slips. You go still first, then you fix what can be fixed. The quartet faltered, found itself, carried on. Just a joke, one of the groomsmen said, already building the defense. Lighten up, old man. The words skated over the slick on my shoulders and dropped to the carpet. I looked at my daughter. Her laughter hovered, then thinned. For a heartbeat, I saw the little girl who used to press greasy pennies into my palm after I came home, saying, "For your jar, Daddy." It flickered and went out. I heard a server whisper, "Should I get towels?" I shook my head before she could move. Some messes need witnesses. Mark raised his glass toward the nearest table as if toasting a prank. The guests closest to him tittered, hungry for cues. Beyond them, faces were beginning to shift, confusion passing into discomfort, discomfort into something else. I stood there dripping and let the silence expand around my breath. The room's lighting made a clean halo on every polished surface. It made no halo for me. If I spoke, I would give them an exit. His anger, his scene, his fault. I swallowed the old man's urge to lecture and the father's ache to plead. What I had left was posture. I straightened, lifted my chin, blinked the sting from my eyes. The lump in my throat wasn't dignity, it was memory, and memory is heavier. Jenna set the empty bucket down with a clack that traveled farther than laughter. She looked at me as if waiting for a script she could mock. I had none to give her. Broadcasters stopped at last. The hush that followed wasn't kind. It was exact. In that silence, something inside me broke, but not in the way they expected. Have never believed this day. Recognizable, I saw mirror because the mirror would not argue. Under the ballroom lights, the restroom looked like a small museum of shine, chrome faucets, marble that pretended to be colder than the air. I turned the tap and let water run until it was almost too warm, cupped it, and lifted it to my face. Coffee grit loosened first, then a stripe of gravy, then the thin film of humiliation that water could not reach. The quartet's music leaked through the door as a smudge. 4 distant Bs, steady, indifferent. The man in the mirror was older than I feel on my best mornings. Lines at the mouth from years of clamping back replies, oil-black crescents under the nails the soap never fully takes. A nick on the chin from a hurried shave. I patted dry with paper towels that felt like cheap cloth, then pressed the wad into the trash with more care than the moment deserved. I have trained my hands to finish what they start. Mary's laugh used to live in rooms like this. Even a hotel restroom would collect it in the corners. Light, bell clear, disappearing just before you could catch it. She had a way of making me taller without a word. The first time she visited my garage, she wore sandals and stood like a queen between tool chests and jacks, asking what each wrench did as if they were instruments in an orchestra. "You tune people's lives," she told me, "so they can keep moving." I believed her because she believed me first. Hospitals smell like boiled air. The day she didn't come home, I learned that truth and a dozen others I didn't want. I held Jenna on my lap in that cold light, whispering the shape of a promise to a face too young to understand. On the drive back, streetlights looked like planets. In the house, I walked from room to room, collecting the small inventions of Mary's care. Notes on the fridge, a sweater folded with her exactness, a mug with a faint ring where her tea had cooled. I tucked the mug back on its shelf and felt the silence begin to gather. I put a ring in my pocket that night, because pockets are where a man keeps what he can't bear to lose. Jenna grew in the space Mary left. First a sound, then a reach, then a list of needs no book completely answers. I learned the choreography, baby on hip, wrench in hand, invoices stacked beneath a magnet shaped like a sun. After bedtime, I sat on the stoop and let the desert cool the sweat the day had priced into me. When school started, Jenna's drawings came home as storms of color. A red truck, a giant blue cat, a man with big hands and a smile wide as an axle. "That's you," she said. "You fix things." Fixing meant saying yes to late shifts and Sunday emergencies, then saying yes again when a neighbor's car wouldn't start and she had a double shift at the diner. It meant bad coffee and good jokes with men whose knuckles told their biographies. It meant showing Jenna how to change a tire and how to look a person in the eye when they spoke, because both skills prevent trouble. It meant sometimes missing a recital, then sitting on the floor later while she replayed the song with the stubborn patience of a child who needs you to catch up. Years pass the way belts spin, quietly, until something slips. High school taught Jenna a different language, the one where fathers become embarrassing for breathing too loud. She hated the smell of my jacket in winter, the hint of gasoline no soap could scold away. I tried switching detergents, then jackets, then the subject. On graduation day, she hugged me fast, like gratitude delivered between trains. I didn't blame her. I blamed time. Blowing Troom door opened with a soft gasp of hinges. A man in a suit stepped in, stopped when he saw the stains on my collar, and looked away in that careful way people do when they don't want their pity to show. He washed his hands without a word, eyes fixed on the faucet. On his way out, he hesitated. "Do you need anything?" he asked, already halfway gone. "No," I said, and offered a small smile to make it easy for him to leave. He nodded, grateful for my kindness to his discomfort, and the door took him back to the music. I turned back to the mirror. On the counter sat the small box I had meant to give Jenna, a simple thing, wood smoothed by worry. Inside, Mary had left a note for our daughter years ago, written in the April before the test came back with their final grammar. The paper had grown soft at the folds. The ink had not faded. I had planned to give it after the cake, after the speeches, when the night slowed and the words might find room. I imagined Jenna reading it, imagined her mouth forming the old sweetness of her mother's name. I imagined too much. Tia. My fingers went to my breast pocket and found what they always find. The ring. Warm from my own heat, flawed at the edge where a tool had once kissed it by mistake. I cupped it in my palm and felt its map, the promise you can trace without looking. Mary's hands were small, mine swallowed hers, and she said she liked it that way because it made the world feel less sharp. I closed my fist and tried to borrow that blessing now. Undermined, a cheer rose and fell as if the entire crowd had remembered why they were gathered and then forgotten again. I listened to the shape of it, the parts of a celebration that survived their reasons. Somewhere down the hall a child squealed, someone's cousin maybe, hiding under a table and loving the chaos. Life keeps making sound even when you wish it would pause. I rinsed the collar again until the water ran clear, then dabbed at the edge of a stain that refused to surrender. The towel left pills on the fabric like tiny snow. I brushed them off one by one. Work teaches you to respect small finishes. I slipped the ring back into its corner and felt the comfort of its weight. Promises are heavier than metal, but metal helps you remember. I picked up the wooden box. It seemed lighter than when I arrived, or maybe I had grown heavier. Either way, a father walks back out when his daughter is on the other side of a door. The mirror returned my nod, a pact between men who know there are worse things than being seen. Is to protect Jenna, but from whom, if not from herself? Is that Whitfield, the man from the bus fire? The words drifted over the clink of silverware as guests flowed from the dance floor toward the dining room, a current carrying perfume, applause residue, and the hum of 100 small conversations. I followed in the wake, jacket brushed clean as it would get, collar still damp where warm water had argued with stains. The hotel staff had transformed the adjoining hall into a lake of linen, round tables set with chargers the size of hubcaps, place cards lettered in a script too elegant for my pocketed glasses. At the far end, above the head table, an LED screen hung like a second moon. I measured my steps. Age teaches you how to be present without taking space. Couples threaded past, laughing at whatever joke they needed. A woman in emerald paused, eyes flicking to my collar, then to my face, then away, a quick 3-beat of uncertainty. Her companion looked over his shoulder with the curiosity people reserve for a near celebrity or a near disaster. "Firefight, I field, I swear," a man murmured to his table, tapping his phone, drawing a circle with one finger as if conjuring a memory. He wore a lapel pin from a bank and the comfortable confidence of someone who has never been ignored at a valet stand. "Phoenix last month, West McDowell, that bus." My name isn't music in rooms like this. It sits flat until something else lifts it. Still, heads dipped closer together. A napkin fluttered like a white flag. The quartet in the main hall shifted from canon to croon. Sound bled through the partition doors and pooled along the carpet. I took a seat near the back where the cool of the air vents gathered and placed the small wooden box on the table as if it were just another centerpiece. A young server approached with water. She had the careful hands of someone still new to work. Bracelet turned inward so it wouldn't chime, hair pinned in a hurry. She tilted the pitcher and then stopped. Eyes narrowing, not with judgment, but with recognition that felt older than she was. "Sir," she whispered, then corrected herself. "I mean, Mr. Whitfield, were you at the fire?" The question made a skip in her voice. "I was near it," I said. Near is a word broad enough to carry heat. Her smile came quick and private before she remembered where she stood. "My cousin's boy rides that route," she said. Breath small, he won't stop talking about a man who broke glass with his elbow. Color rose in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I have other tables." She left, the ice chiming softly against the pitcher's rim. Across the room, the banker with the pin had his phone face up, swiping, squinting, boxing the screen with his fingers as if framing a photograph that wouldn't sit still. "I'm telling you," he insisted to no one and everyone, "that's him." His companion leaned in. The table fell into a hush that wasn't quite belief and wasn't quite doubt. A man I didn't know raised a camera, then aborted the move, embarrassed by his own curiosity. Another didn't abort. He lifted his phone in the cover of a stretch and took a photo as if the act were a stretch too. Whispering travels faster than truth, but sometimes it carries truth with it. Small ripples moved through the room, disturbing place settings and certainty. Thai heat pressed its palm against the windows, the Arizona dusk sliding from gold to copper. Staff pulled the partition doors wider, and the sound from the ballroom swelled. A host reminding everyone to find their seats. A burst of laughter at a joke built for laughter. My table remained a little island. I straightened the butter knife someone had laid askew, because order helps when everything else buckles. "Excuse me," a voice said at my shoulder, polite. The banker had crossed from his table and stood above me, phone in one hand, the other hovering, as if he might offer it or not. At close range, he looked younger than I'd thought, or maybe just less certain. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, "which always means you already have. But my firm has clients in the district where that accident happened. I read everything for 2 weeks." His eyes found the collar stain, flinched, and recovered. "If you are who I think you are, thank you." "Riayasi, I am who I am," I said, because names are tricky nets. And I was where I was. He absorbed that, nodded, looked as if he might say more, then stepped back with gratitude he didn't know where to put. The young server returned with bread. When she set the basket down, her fingers brushed the wooden box and paused, a bird touching down. "That's pretty," she said, voice barely audible. "My granddad keeps his medals in a tin." She glanced up, eyes bright, and then, because this was work and she had other tables, she moved on. Phones lifted here and there now with less apology. Screens lit faces from below, making small theaters of their features. At a table near the side aisle, a teenage boy, too old for the children's table, too young for the bar, Googled something and turned his screen to his mother. Her lips shaped an O. She looked at me, then at her son, then at me again, as if we were a before and after she needed to reconcile. "This can't be right," someone said from the head table, voice wrapped in amusement to keep it harmless. Laughter answered, but it was a thinner laughter, the kind that leaks if you don't hold it together. The MC's assistant hustled past with a clipboard, face set to neutral. She spoke to the AV tech stationed by the screen, a man in a black polo with a coil tucked behind his ear. He nodded, tapped the laptop, tested a cable, looked up to the rafters where light waited like rain. A woman with a camera on a strap, the official photographer, floated by and took a photo in my direction. Not of me, but of the room beyond me, the composition using my shoulder as foreground. Still, she dipped her chin at me after she clicked, a small bow, the kind professionals give when they see who is holding still. The whispers gathered weight. Stories accumulate like dust. One lands, then another, until the surface changes texture. From somewhere to my left, a voice rose. Clear, male, the kind that rings across charity galas and boardrooms with the same bell. He saved those kids, unprotected and hung there, refusing to fall. Faces turned as if tugged by a shared thread. Chairs creaked, a chorus of wood admitting strain. I felt the impulse to put my hands under the table, to be smaller in a room that had not allowed me to be big. Instead, I let them rest in view, palms down, grease ghosts long gone but remembered. At the head of the hall, the AV tech lifted one finger to the MC's assistant. She raised hers to the staff by the wall. A relay of small decisions moved like a wave nobody saw until it broke. And then the lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life. "Dad, don't embarrass me with that old box." Penetrated microphone caught Jenna's whisper and let it bloom across the room like a rumor. We were on the little riser the hotel called a stage, tucked between a spray of white lilies and the head table where napkins had been folded into swans. The MC, lacquered smile steady, had just invited the father of the bride to share a few words before the first course. Lights warmed my face. I could feel the narrow grain of the wooden keepsake pressing through my jacket where I held it close. I hadn't planned to do this here. In the restroom, I had promised myself I would wait. After dessert, after laughter softened the edges. But the evening kept peeling dignity from me in thin layers. And sometimes, the only way to keep something from being lost is to put it in the open where it must be seen. "It's just a small thing," I began, the house mic giving my voice a roundness I didn't recognize. "From your mother." Submarine Mark stepped half a pace forward, palm up as if soothing a skittish animal. "Hey, hey," he chuckled into his own mic. Charm turned to full wattage. "Let's keep this tight, folks. We've got a schedule." Scattered laughter followed the word schedule, as if it were a punchline. The crowd shifted. Chairs squeaked, crystal chimed, brief polite encouragement. I felt the air from the vents stroke the back of my neck. I looked at Jenna. The veil made a light curtain along her shoulder. Up close, I could see the pins that kept it in place. "It's a letter," I said, gentler than I felt, "and a ring. Your mother wrote it in April." Breached Jenna's smile was a blade wrapped in silk. "We don't need props, Dad," she said. "People came to celebrate, not whatever this is." She tapped the box with one manicured nail. A crisp sound, a metronome for humiliation. Freezes from the floor, the photographer tilted her lens, debating the shot. The MC angled himself between us like a referee who wants the match to end without bruises. "Maybe we do the sentimental bit later," he offered cheerfully. "Right now, we're all starving, aren't we?" A wave of agreeable murmurs rolled outward, eager to be told what to feel. "It was meant for tonight," I said, more to the box than to anyone. I turned it so the hinge faced me and the lid opened toward Jenna like an offered palm. Light glanced off the band inside, simple gold, the scratch at its edge soft as a scar. On top lay Mary's folded page, creased into a square by a woman who measured care. Jenna looked not at the ring or the letter, but at the faces beyond us, friends, co-workers, strangers who owned pieces of her new life. I watched calculation cross her features. The speed at which embarrassment travels, the price of pausing, the currency of poise. She chose speed. "Pictured," she said, voice icing over. "Put it away." "It's your mother's hand," I said. "She saved a sentence for you. I could read it." Mark laughed like a host, rescuing a segment. "Buddy, there'll be plenty of time for family heirlooms at the after-party." He glanced at the audience. "You know dads, always with the garage stuff." This time the laughter found purchase, sliding into the cracks opened by comfort. Someone clapped once, then stopped. I felt the peculiar quiet inside the chest that comes just before a car stalls. The box rested on my palm as lightly as a bird that has decided, for the moment, to stay. I lifted it a few inches closer to Jenna, not insistence, only reach. She flinched as if the wood could stain. I said not now, she hissed, and the hiss, too, was amplified, bright and thin. "You're making this weird." The MC moved to intercede. "Okay, first course," he sang, desperate cheerfulness blazing. Behind us, a server hesitated with a tray of salads, unsure whether to pass or retreat. A swan napkin wobbled in a draft and slumped into an ordinary triangle. "It isn't weird," I said. "It's your mother," and flat. He reached out, not cruelly at first, only decisively, and gripped the corner of the lid, meaning to close it to solve the moment the way you snap a case shut at the end of a presentation. The hinge balked. The movement knocked against my knuckles. He yanked a little harder, impatient now, and the box slid from my hand. Time rarely slows, but it learned to for me in garages. Falling sockets and slipping jacks measured in small eternities. The box tipped, the ring chimed once against wood. The folded paper lifted as if remembering breath. The edge of the lid caught Mark's cufflink. He snatched his arm away, annoyed, and with that small flick sent the keepsake arcing off the lectern. It hit the white linen skirt of the head table, bounced, spun, wood against wood, and skittered under the drape where knees and handbags waited in the dim. Someone in the front row ducked on instinct. A bridesmaid squealed and then tittered, the tidy sound of embarrassment looking for cover. The laugh spread. It wasn't loud at first. It didn't need to be. Laughter in rooms like this has good breeding. It doesn't shout, it multiplies. "Whoops," Mark said brightly as if the word could mop the floor. "No harm done." He aimed for bonhomie and landed on condescension. Jenna's face, dear to me even now, set into a mask that women learn to wear when they have chosen an audience over a person. "Please," she said through her smile. "Can we eat?" The MC seized the opening. "Let's have a hand for our lovely couple," he cried. Applause answered on cue, a tidy storm. Staff surged as if released, plates appearing in a choreography that had been paused too long. The server with the tray of salads passed behind me. Breath quick. I could smell dill, lemon, the cold of chilled porcelain. I thought of Mary folding that letter at the kitchen table, while Jenna napped in a puddle of afternoon light, a cup of tea cooling to leave its faint ring. The breath between sentences where love sits before taking shape. I thought of my promise, of all the promises a parent makes without words and keeps with work. Mark leaned toward me, a whisper meant to be friendly and firm. "We'll grab it later, champ." Champ. The word thudded. A boy near the second row bent, lifted the tablecloth, peered into the dark. "I see it," he announced to his mother, then lost courage when her hand found his shoulder. The cloth fell back into place. The small world under the table closed again. I stepped away from the mic so I wouldn't tell the room what it already believed about me. The applause thinned into cutlery sounds, talk of vinaigrettes and seat assignments, the private weather of well-fed people. I placed my empty hand against the smooth face of the lectern, where the box had slid, and felt the faint tremor of the PA humming. At that moment, I knew this night would not end in silence. The smell of oil and rust was the perfume of my life. It clung to the rafters and the pegboard, to the cracked concrete floor with its constellations of old spills, to the oscillating fan that never turned quite straight. Even now, with the garage empty and the roll-up door half open to the Phoenix heat, the scent rose from the benches and tool trays the way music rises from an instrument left on a chair. Sunlight pushed under the door in a bright bar and caught the dust as it sailed and settled. My footprints were there, heel and toe, a history in gray. I walked the perimeter like a man checking a fence. The lift stood in the bay with its arms folded, waiting for a car that would not arrive. The red toolbox, my first big purchase, still wore the sticker Jenna had pressed crooked on the side when she was 6. A coffee can held bolts of different sizes like a jar of coins. When I shook it, the sound took me back to nights when the radio played oldies and the world narrowed to the sweet logic of threads and torque. A desk wobbled in the corner where invoices once stacked like little brick walls. My hand found the groove my elbow had ground into the wood over years of leaning and reading and figuring. A jute then, I opened at 7, but was here by 5, because quiet is the best coworker. I'd sweep, empty the drip pans, put the parts orders in before the phone started. Jenna slept in the office on a cot I'd bought at a surplus store. She'd curl on her side, breath whistling softly, hand under cheek. At 6:30, I'd butter bread for her lunch and tuck it into a brown bag with an apple and a note. "You can do hard things." When she woke, she'd sit on the stool with her backpack at her feet and color in a grease-smudged book. I'd hand her a donut sometimes and pretend not to notice when the powdered sugar found my shoulder. Mornings had a choreography. I'd torque lug nuts with the rhythm my wrist remembered, then wash up with orange pumice soap while she brushed her hair and frowned at the part. We'd lock the door, and I'd walk her across the lot to the truck, her hand a small dispatch in mine. Seatbelt. Click. The sky pinking over the strip mall. I'd drop her at school a few minutes early so we could sit in the car and listen to the last verse of whatever song was on, and she'd ask what it meant. I lied when I didn't know and told the truth when I did. That sometimes love is work, and often work is love, and both of those things are worth being tired for. Some nights I didn't make bedtime. A tow would arrive with a busted timing chain and I'd stay late, losing hours inside the engine like a man in a story who steps into a forest and stumbles out years later. The office lamp drew moths, and I'd talk to them as if they were customers. Hold still, I'll get you sorted. Around midnight, the fan would give up and the air would go thick. I'd open the door, listen to coyotes far out and sirens closer in, and try to balance the ledger where fathers judge themselves. In the morning, I'd be back at that part of the shop where the light comes in low and gold and makes even old things shine. Jenna grew. She stopped sleeping at the shop and started visiting after practice, soccer, then choir, then just friends. She rolled her eyes at the hand soap and the paper towels that left lint. One day she called the smell embarrassing, and it landed in me like a nail that would not come out. I switched brands, changed shirts, kept a jacket in the truck. But a life gets into you, and I could scour my hands until they flash pink and still find a crescent of gray at the cuticles by dinner. I looked now at the Customer of the Month photos pinned crooked along the wall. I remembered their cars and their stories. A grandmother who brought me tamales at Christmas. A kid who'd driven 20 miles with the parking brake on because nobody had taught him the sound of wrong. I remembered the bus fire too, smoke like a new color, glass that wouldn't give until my elbow did, the small bodies lifted one by one through the frame. The garage made those choices feel inevitable. You fix what's in front of you. Place still smells like money, a voice said from the door. Raymond leaned against the jamb, hat in his hands, smile bent with years. He'd worked 2 bays over for a decade before his back insisted he stop. He always showed up with jokes that wore work boots. Smells like ghosts, I said. Same thing, he said, stepping in, letting his eyes run the shelves the way a man counseled friends at a reunion. You all right? Define it, I said. He winced in sympathy and set his hat on the desk where my elbow groove waited. He didn't force talk of the wedding. He had the mercy to circle it first, asking after the compressor I'd sold to a kid last spring, admiring a transmission jack he'd once threatened to steal. Eventually, he pulled a chair over and sat, elbows on knees, hands knit loosely. You know, he said, I used to think a man could outwork shame. Like if you just kept your head down and your hands moving, the world's nonsense would slide off. How'd that go for you? I asked. Turns out nonsense has claws. He tipped his chin toward the small cot folded against the wall. Remember the time Jenna learned to ride without training wheels? You ran the length of that alley like a fool while she yelled at you not to let go, and you let go anyway because that's the job. I laughed despite myself. She didn't forgive me for a week. You every day she pedaled after that, he said, even when she didn't know she was doing it. We sat in the cool hum of the lonely fan and let the place talk for us. A nail settled in wood somewhere. The door creaked as if to remind us it still had a voice. Outside, a truck rolled past dragging a shadow. Raymond leaned back and watched me the way men do when they're measuring, not judging. I heard pieces, he said finally. Folks talk. They shouldn't, but they do. They always have, I said. Gossip is just a cheaper fuel. Thumb along a scratch in the chair's arm. You don't have to answer this, he said, eyes on the wood. But are you sure you want to keep quiet? Let them write the whole story from their table settings and playlists. Blackmail because shrugging is easier than the truth. What else would I do? Go on a stage and make a speech? The last stage didn't go so well. There's more than one kind of speaking. He looked at me then, square. There's the kind you do with a microphone, and the kind you do by standing where the light finds you. He paused. You sure you want to stay silent forever? Like a tool set gently on a bench, solid, ringing a little. I stood and crossed to the pegboard and pressed my fingers into a clean outline where a wrench used to hang. The empty shape fit my hand perfectly, and not at all. I thought of Jenna's face, of Mary's folded letter, of the way the crowd had looked away and then back again, as if something in them were waking up against their will. Take. The sun slid a little higher and the bright bar on the floor moved with it, inching toward the cot. A dust mote bumped another and changed direction. I felt the old pull in my back and the older pull in my chest. Silence protects no one. It only hides the truth. Skin remembers fire the way heart remembers betrayal. In the quiet of my small house, the old swamp cooler ticking in the window like a worn metronome, I rolled up my sleeve and traced the pale seam that curled along my forearm. Under the lamp's yellow cone, the scar shone faintly. A thin river mapped across skin. Heat is gone in a second. Memory lingers like a hand that won't lift. Outside, night pressed against the screen, crickets bowing their invisible violins. A soft knock. I opened the door to Emily from next door, sneakers untied, a paper plate balanced in both hands. "Mom made muffins," she said, almost whispering, as if nighttime demanded small voices. Cinnamon wandered into the room ahead of her. She spotted my arm before I could tug the sleeve down. "Did you get hurt?" Her eyes were large, the kind that take in more than adults will admit. "Once," I said, keeping it simple. "A long time ago." She stepped closer, as children do, unafraid of marks. "Was it on your tools?" She glanced at the shelf where I keep the old wrench set, the one that refuses to stay retired. "Not that day." I set the plate on the table. "Do you like the tops or the bottoms of muffins?" "The tops," she said without hesitation then. "But what happened?" I poured 2 glasses of milk to buy a breath, then found myself looking past the lamp and into heat. "It comes with smell first. Rubber thickening, diesel turned sour." The bus had folded its nose into a light pole like a tired animal leaning on a fence. A window was pinned shut, the emergency latch bent wrong. Smoke swarmed the aisle. Children's voices thread together when they panic. It becomes one long note you can feel in your bones. I don't remember deciding. One moment I was on the curb. The next my jacket was over my mouth and my shoulder barked against tempered glass. It didn't give. Nothing does until it does. I hit again, not with anger but with intent, and pain flowered up my arm as the pain surrendered into pebbles. Heat ran over my cheeks like opened ovens. I reached in and a small hand found mine, sticky with fear, astonishingly warm, and then another. We passed them down to men and women who had appeared from everywhere, that sudden army neighbors make when the world catches. Someone shouted numbers. Someone wept without sound. A boy coughed black onto my sleeve. A girl's braid snagged on metal, and I freed it with fingers that forgot to shake. Sirens braided into the air. Flames licked at seats, quick and eager. I can still hear the wheeze of the bus's last breath, the way machines die like animals when no one is watching. We pulled until there were no more small bodies in the smoke, until the aisle was only heat and noise and the names of children yelled into wind. "Did it hurt?" Emily asked, the muffin top crumbling in her hand. "After," I said, "not during." She studied the scar again and nodded, as if that answered something important. "Mom says scars are where the brave parts show." I smiled because I wanted her to keep that sentence. Your mom is smart. We ate in a silence that felt full, the kind that makes room. She licked sugar from her thumb and told me about a spelling test. I walked her to the door when her mother called, the porch light spilling a small moon onto the steps. "Good night, Mr. Whitfield," she said, and then she was a shadow skipping across the yard. Back at the table, I touched the scar once more. The skin has forgiven. The memory has not asked to be excused. I thought of the wedding hall, of laughter acrylic and hard, of a daughter fighting invisible battles I could not name. Heroes are noisy on screens. In houses like mine, they rinse their cups and turn off lamps. And yet, not even Jenna knew. "You don't belong here, old man." The words floated out through the open patio doors, carried on music that pulsed with too much bass for a neighborhood night. I had walked past Jenna's new house knowing well I wasn't on the guest list. Laughter spilled into the warm air, glasses clinked, and the orange glow of string lights framed faces I knew from the wedding. Her friends, his groomsmen, neighbors who had come for curiosity as much as for company. I stopped at the edge of the yard, half in shadow, the gravel crunching under my shoes betraying me when I would rather have been invisible. Anna leaned against the kitchen island, a cocktail in her hand, her smile bright and practiced. Mark stood taller, surrounded by his circle, his arm loose around her shoulders as though to remind her she was his prize. Their friends toasted to new beginnings and upgrades, words that felt like knives wrapped in napkins. I saw my daughter's eyes catch mine through the glass door. For a moment they widened, softening, then she looked away quickly, pretending she hadn't seen, pretending I wasn't there. I stayed outside, close enough to hear, but far enough to remain only a rumor. Snippets reached me between the beats of music. He embarrassed her. That box of junk smelled like grease. Lucky she turned out so different. Their laughter rose each time my name came up, and each time it cut deeper. A boyish voice I recognized as one of Mark's friends said, "At least she won't have to worry about him dragging her down anymore." Another replied, "Yeah, he's like some relic, right? Time to put him in a museum." Words I could swallow. The one I couldn't came from Mark himself. He raised his glass, voice steady and smug. "He's just a mechanic, nothing more." The cheer that followed was sharp, like glass breaking. My daughter did not laugh, but she did not speak either. Silence can wound as cleanly as speech. I turned from the doorway, heart pulling tight against my ribs. The night air smelled of cut grass and spilled beer. In the street, a car door slammed. Headlights washed across the yard and voices called out greetings. New arrivals, the kind that shift a night, turn it, tilt it. But something more was about to arrive. Her handwriting still smelled of lavender. Constrained, the old cedar box creaked as I opened it, the hinges complaining like bones in winter. Inside, folded neatly as though she had set it there yesterday, lay Mary's letter. The paper was yellowed at the edges, the ink softened with time, but the loops and flourishes were hers, steady, graceful, deliberate. I held it close and a trace of lavender seemed to rise from the page, or maybe from memory itself. My thumb brushed the crease, and I was back in our kitchen, sunlight spilling across her shoulders as she wrote with that fountain pen she loved. I sat on the edge of the bed, the house around me too quiet. The night outside was thick with crickets, but in here it was only me, the hum of the lamp, and her voice carried on the paper. "Jenna, darling, one day you'll be grown, with your own choices and your own storms. When that day comes, I won't be there to hold your hand, but your father will. Remember, he gave you his mornings, his nights, his hands, his back, his heart. Remember that you are never alone, not while he is alive." The words blurred. I blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, sliding down and spotting the letter just as I feared. My chest heaved with a grief that was old and new, all at once. Mary had known this day might come, the day Jenna would forget, or be convinced to forget, what had been built for her. She had written not for herself, but for us, as if planting a seed she prayed would sprout long after she was gone. I closed my eyes and saw Mary smile, the faint lines at the corners, the way she would tilt her head when Jenna did something funny, like she wanted to memorize her laugh. I heard her voice as if she stood beside me. "Protect her, even from herself if you must." The letter trembled in my hands. I folded it gently, slid it back into the box, and pressed my palm to the lid as though sealing a vow. Whatever shame or laughter had been poured on me that night, this was stronger. This was truth in ink, a legacy no jeer could erase. Tomorrow she will read it, whether she wants to or not. Dignity doesn't shout, it waits. The words hung in the steam between us, drifting from Raymond's lips as naturally as the aroma of burnt coffee and warm bread. The diner was nearly empty, a place of cracked vinyl booths and sugar dispensers that clumped on damp mornings. I had chosen it for its quiet, but Raymond made it into a pulpit. He leaned across the table, elbows planted firm, eyes locked on mine as if daring me to look away. "You think silence protects her," he said. "It doesn't. Silence just hands her over to people who don't know the truth." His spoon clinked against his mug. "The town knows half the story already, rumors, bits of it. But if you don't speak, you let them write the ending for you." I stared at the swirl of cream in my cup, the way it curled into clouds and vanished. She doesn't want my truth, I said. She wants distance, wants to forget that her life came from grease and busted knuckles. Raymond snorted. And you'd let her rewrite you into nothing? That fire didn't rewrite you. Those kids are alive because you move when others froze. Dignity doesn't shout, Tom, but it does show up. And it's time you showed up. The Skylit Rameri and the show comes on the Area of Sounds. Detected 2 weeks website from Area of Sounds, which is thinking about journeying with ages. One date is it makes sure we care, lavender and around our school. My hand tightened on the coffee cup until I felt the heat bleed into my skin. Raymond reached across the table, tapping once sharp against my knuckles. Tell them, tell her, not with anger, with truth. Let the whole room see it. That's the only way she'll ever understand. I looked at in my chest like an old engine catching after too many tries. The weight of years pressed down, but it no longer pinned. I could feel it shifting into fuel. My nod was small, but it was enough. It's time. Raymond's mouth curved, not into a smile exactly, but into the relief of a man who'd been waiting too long. The clatter of a waitress dropping plates reminded me the world was still moving outside our booth. But inside, something had turned a corner. Team. That night, I slept without dreams, for the first time in years. Ladies and gentlemen, live from City Hall, the ballroom hushed as the MC's voice echoed, thin and almost uncertain over the sound system. A moment earlier, laughter had been spilling across the tables like champagne, sharp, effervescent, careless. Now the chandeliers dimmed, lights fell away, and the giant LED screen at the far wall flickered to life. Forks hovered above plates, murmurs died mid-breath. 500 guests turned their silks and suits, whispering as one. The city seal shimmered into focus, and then the camera steadied on the mayor's podium. He stood flanked by flags, his voice sure and ceremonial. Tonight it is my honor to present the Citizen Valor Award. This year's recipient demonstrated extraordinary courage when a school bus erupted in flames only weeks ago. While others watched in fear, he rushed into the fire and carried children to safety, one by one, until every life was saved. The words slid through the room like a new air, heavy and electric. I felt my shoulders stiffen, my breath caught. Around me, the guests craned forward, curiosity sharpening. A name was coming, an instinct told me whose. The mayor lifted a plaque. For bravery beyond measure, the city of Phoenix recognizes Mr. Thomas Whitfield. The ballroom exploded. Gasps first, sharp and scattered. Then a rising roar of applause that climbed until it filled every chandelier crystal and tablecloth fold. People shot to their feet, chairs scraped back in a discordant chorus. Hands clapped until palms stung. The same mouths that had whispered, "Beggar," now shouted my name. Seated still, as if movement would break the spell, light from the screen washed over me, painting my worn suit in sudden radiance. Heads turned, phones lifted, recording, confirming. "It's him," someone cried. "That's him." Another voice cracked with awe. "He saved those kids." A server, tray trembling in her hands, pressed her free palm to her mouth and whispered, "I knew it." Applause surged again, no longer polite but thunderous, a tide that lifted me against my will. Strangers were clapping for a story they had not known until now. Strangers stood taller because of it. The sound beat against me until my chest ached, until the heat behind my eyes threatened to spill. I looked across the room to Jenna. She had been laughing only minutes ago. Now her smile clung to her face like porcelain about to crack. Mark's hand slipped from her arm as the screen replayed flames and rescue and clipped images. She didn't blink, didn't move. The applause kept rising, and Jenna's smile froze into horror. "Thomas! Thomas! Thomas!" they chanted. The sound rolled across the ballroom like a drumline, each beat of my name louder than the last. Moments ago, I had been a punchline in a thrift store suit. Now 500 voices struck the air with syllables that didn't mock, but honored. The screen behind the stage had gone dark, yet its glow lingered in the room, in their eyes, in the sudden tilt of every conversation. Hands reached for mine, soft palms, jeweled fingers, calloused grips from men who worked the desert sun. Phones rose like a forest of glowing branches, flashes bursting as guests pressed close, eager for proof they had stood near the man from the bus fire. "A photo, Mr. Whitfield?" "Sir, it's an honor." "Can you shake my boy's hand?" The tide of attention surged around me, lifting, pulling, nearly overwhelming. In that tide, Jenna faltered. She tried to cling to her composure, but every attempt slipped through her fingers. I watched as she stretched a smile, thin as paper, insisting, "Yes, he's my father." Yet the crowd hardly turned. They were busy congratulating me, not her. A moment before, she had been the jewel at the center of the room. Now she was the daughter of the man they called a hero. Mark attempted bravado. "Let's not exaggerate," he said loudly, patting my back with feigned warmth. "A small fire, quick thinking, that's all." But his words died as a woman in pearls rounded on him, eyes sharp. "Quick thinking?" He pulled children out of an inferno while others stood frozen. "Don't you dare reduce it." Murmurs of agreement rippled outward. Another man, silver hair catching the chandelier light, stepped closer to Jenna. His voice carried, heavy with disgust. "You humiliated a hero." Position quieted just enough for the words to land hard. Heads turned, conversations halted. The truth was out, public and merciless. I saw Jenna's chin tremble, her shoulders folding inward. She looked at me, not at the crowd, not at Mark, but at me as tears spilled, streaking the makeup she had so carefully set that morning.
"Tay, please," she sobbed, voice cracking under the weight of hundreds of eyes. "I didn't mean—"
"Stop calling him Dad. You never acted like a daughter tonight." The voice came from a woman in her 70s, her silver hair pinned with pearls. Her words sliced through the chaos sharper than the string quartet that had long since fallen silent. Gasps scattered, and all at once the ballroom fractured into small storms of whispers and shouts. Jenna clutched at her dress as if fabric could hold her together. "Please, you don't understand," she stammered. "It was a joke, just a—" Their guest snapped, his bow tie loosened, face flushed with outrage. "You poured garbage on your father while he sat silent. That's cruelty, not humor." Jenna's eyes darted wildly, searching for refuge, but each attempt at defense met another wall. "He never told me about the award," she insisted, her voice rising.
"I didn't know."
An older man, one of my former customers from the garage, leaned forward on his cane. "You didn't need to know about awards to show respect. He raised you, alone. That should have been enough." The crowd murmured assent, their judgment heavier than any sentence a court could hand down. My daughter's words began to collapse under their weight. She opened her mouth again, but whatever explanation she reached for dissolved before it left her lips. I remained still. I let the room do what I could not. My silence was no longer weakness. It was a mirror, and in it she saw herself. My hands rested calmly on the tablecloth, and when I lifted my eyes to hers, I gave her nothing but steady quiet. Mark shifted at her side, face tight, jaw working. Then, without a word, he slipped his hand from her arm. He stepped back, then further, until his figure melted into the dispersing crowd. He didn't look back. The abandonment was complete. Jenna stood alone, her sobs breaking against the rising tide of disdain. She turned toward me at last, but this time there was no command, no mocking, no daughter's authority, only a fragile, broken plea. For the first time, she looked smaller than me. The hallway stretched ahead of me, carpet muffling my steps, neon exit signs painting my shadow long and thin. Behind the double doors, a ballroom still boiled, applause, arguments, voices calling my name, but here was only the hum of air vents and the thud of my own heart. On a side table near the coat check, I saw it, the small cedar box, scuffed where it had been tossed aside. I picked it up gently, brushed the dust from its lid, and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Its weight steadied me. Hurried after me, breathless with admiration, offering handshakes, but I smiled, nodded once, and kept moving. My phone buzzed. Raymond's name lit the screen. I didn't answer. Not yet. Tate to Kaya doors leading to the parking lot. Footsteps came fast behind me. "Dad!" Jenna's voice cracked. She caught my arm, tears streaking her face. For a moment I turned, placed my hand softly on her shoulder, and met her eyes without speaking. Then I let go. I stepped into the night, the desert air cool against my skin. Behind me, the ballroom roared. Ahead, only silence. By morning, every headline had my name. Sunrise, unknown numbers, station prefixes, polite producers asking for quotes. I let them ring. The porch filled instead. Raymond with coffee in a paper cup, Emily with a drawing of a bus and a man with big hands, neighbors carrying muffins, tamales, folded notes. The desert light came clean over the roofs and voices stacked gently on the steps. Two parents from the route stood awkwardly by my gate, then crossed the yard as if it were a river. The mother's face trembled when she spoke. "You pulled my boy out second," she said. "He remembers your watch." The father squeezed my shoulder once, like fastening a seatbelt. Others came with thanks that didn't know where to land. A small shape broke from a group and ran at me, arms up. I scooped him without thinking. He buried his face in my collar, his breath warm against my neck. "You're my hero," he said, as if it were simply true. Around us, the house breathed like it hadn't in years. Laughter, stories, the clink of cups, doors opening, one after another. But one door remained closed, Jenna's. "Dad, is this Mom's handwriting?" Jenna's voice trembled as she stood in the doorway of my small living room, the evening light slanting through the blinds. I nodded, pressing the cedar box into her hands. Her fingers traced the familiar loops of ink before she unfolded the paper with the reverence of a relic. She read in silence, lips moving with each line. "If you forget everything else, never forget your father's hands, scarred, but always holding you." The words cracked her. The composure she wore at the wedding shattered. Tears welled and fell unchecked, her breath catching like a child's. I sat across from her, the room still, except for the soft sound of paper rustling and her sobs. My eyes lingered on the letter, but my heart was fixed on her face, on the recognition dawning at last, the memory Mary had written to preserve. The moment stretched, heavy and healing all at once. Then Jenna dropped the letter to her lap, rose and crossed the small space between us. Her hands shaking reached for mine. She clutched them as if afraid they might vanish. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The desert sun rose over Phoenix, bright and unforgiving. It poured across the porch boards like molten brass, catching the dust and the chipped paint of the railing, warming the small table between us. On it lay the medal the city sent over last night, still in its velvet case, and Mary's wedding ring, bright as if the years had merely polished it. I sat with my hands quiet, letting morning do the talking. Jenna was beside me, shoulders close but not touching, her hair pulled back the way her mother used to wear it on hot days. She didn't try to explain. I didn't ask her to. Presence can be a sentence with all the verbs you need. Out in the yard, Emily chased a lizard along the cinder block wall, her laughter skipping like stones. A neighbor waved from the sidewalk and kept going, leaving a ribbon of goodwill in his wake. The world moved at a kind pace for once. I opened the case and lifted the medal. Its weight was real, but not heavier than the ring I set beside it. Two circles catching the same light. Courage and vow, work and love, heat and shelter. They touched and something in me loosened. The cursed time, I knew I could rest. Humiliation settled. The father who had once been mocked as a burden stood instead as a symbol of courage and dignity. The daughter's cruelty, witnessed by hundreds, could not erase decades of sacrifice, or the truth that finally came to light before the world. Justice may come late, but it never arrives empty-handed. It restores what was stolen, even if only in honor. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.